Welcome to Watching the Throne.
A lyrical analysis of Kanye West.
My name's Chris Lambert.
My name's Travis Bean, and sorry, I hate to start the show on such a weird note, but I feel kind of weird today.
Travis, are you okay? Why?
I don't know. It's been a weird 24 hours. I've been thinking a lot about the Joker movie. I was excited to talk about Joker, and now I don't know how to feel. I don't know if we're going to talk about Joker.
Well, now we are.
That's nice.
You know, if it makes you feel better, I think there's something I can do.
Oh, tell me.
Well, now it's going to sound weird.
Put a smile on my face.
Oh, I can lay my hands on you. Is that how it goes?
Hands on. Why does that sound familiar? Oh yeah, we're talking about that song today, aren't we?
We are indeed. And yeah, I've been looking forward to this episode for months now. And over the last 24 hours of prep and then the bombshell you dropped today, I am confused on how I feel.
It has been strange. We are, of course, really excited to talk about Hands On. It's an incredible song from Jesus is King. It's layered. It's dramatic. The production's like insane. It doesn't sound like any other Kanye song. Like, I was so excited to talk about it, and I was really excited to talk about Joker because up until about a few hours ago, we thought the song sampled a song from Joker, and we had been talking about how, that plays into the narrative of the album and what inspiration Kanye would possibly draw from the Joker movie. But we have found out in the last couple hours that might not be true.
Right. We tried reaching out to people. Like, I asked Aunt Clemens, hadn't heard anything, which sounds ridiculous, but I actually got to interview him a couple months back. So there's a little bit more of a connection there than me just being like, Aunt, hey. But it has been months and I'm still writing the article, so he might not respond. Also reached out to another producer on it, Frederico Vinver, and also Hilder herself to see, but didn't get an answer for anybody. Our Kanye didn't really have anything, and Twitter also wasn't sure either way. Some speculated that maybe he saw the movie ahead of time. It did come out at Venice in August, and maybe had a few other screenings that Kanye could have potentially been at and known the context of the movie ahead of time. But regardless, it just means that it's hard to say that he was taking in the context of the Joker movie and applying it to the song. You could make the argument that he knew to associate the song with the Joker character. And there's something to the idea of, even in other portrayals of the Joker, he's often going against society and against the institutions of society and represents kind of this outcast figure. And we do have the famous Heath Ledger Joker, and know that Kanye likes The Dark Knight, I do believe. So I still think you'd maybe be able to make some kind of argument about that, but a little less clear for us at the moment.
I mean, regardless, the production on it is amazing. Like, sonically, it's just such an intense song. Like, again, I've never heard our Kanye song sound like this. Like, it's just so kind of brooding and almost like it kind of has a scary tone to it. It really matches the song because you really feel that in the song Kanye feels a bit outcast and like he doesn't belong in the Christian community, and beyond the Christian community, like he's getting hate from all sides, including God. Like, God is kind of punishing him for the way he lived, or chastising him for the way he had lived his life for a long time. So in that sense, like, the production of the song really fits the mood.
Yeah, that just aching solo violin string.
Yeah.
Like, awesome.
I like your impression of it more, I got to be honest. Kanye should just hire you to do all the instrumentation from now on.
I can do a pretty good guitar solo.
Let's hear your Kenny G sax solo.
Oh, God. I don't normally get embarrassed to do things, but Suddenly the idea of doing that. I'm still a little shell shocked from last week's episode when I tried to do the alarm sound.
To be honest, I'm glad you did not try to do the Kenny G solo. Oh God, Jesus. Yeah, there we go.
Nope.
I like that.
Getting there. Nope. But I was talking on Twitter recently about minimalism, and it is interesting that you still see people talk a lot about 808s and Yeezus as minimal. And when I go back and listen to those albums, they don't necessarily feel minimal to me at this point. I mean, some songs like Say You Will, for sure, or On Site feels like more stripped down in some ways than some other songs, but also has so much going on still. Like, I don't really think about minimal Kanye, like truly minimal Kanye, until Ye, Kids See Ghost, and even Jesus is King. And I feel like this song is one of the most minimal things that Kanye has really ever done.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, compared to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, which is so bombastic, he just may not seem very minimal. I think a lot of the times that term is used with Jesus because there's so much space in the songs, you know? Like even On Site, which is a very aggressive song and doesn't seem to fit the mold of minimalism. Like on the surface, like there's just so much space in it. It's almost like sounds are bouncing around. It's not this full sound that you get from like All of the Lights, you know? But I know what you mean. And I think you're right. Like Hands On is very minimal in the way that this entire album is very minimal. Like the idea that it ends with just Kenny G's sax solo and Use This Gospel, like it's just a clean recording of that, and like it's just this one moment that signals so much. Like that's the power of Kanye at this point, and how good he's gotten at minimalism. That, you know, the narrative of the album, like everything that's been brewing up to that sax solo is what gives the solo power. He doesn't need to add like synths and noise and production to it. Like it just exists as that. And because he's been so disciplined and minimalist this entire album, like in songs like Hands On, like it gives it all this power.
Right. Yeah, there's something nice in the contrast between God Is, Hands On, and Use This Gospel, because coming out of Everything We Need and Water, where you have the pivot on the album, where Kanye goes from being more natural or human in his attempts at being Christian or religious in his day-to-day life, to finally having a more spiritual breakthrough and trusting in God to provide everything that we need, and having like the concept of water and how that fuels him and gives him the space and joy to just praise on God Is. And really that energy of God Is going into Hands On, it's such a different tone that would almost seem contradictory to the positive upswing of energy that we get. But I think the point that we'll make looking at this song in comparison to the earlier part is that even if this is tone-wise way more grim or a downturn, there's still something very renewed about how Kanye's dealing with this criticism and his mindset overall, that is a stark contrast still to the behavior we saw on Follow God, Sella, Closed on Sunday, On God, to where he's trying to have a conversation and be more Christian in response to the backlash that he's getting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head last episode when we've been kind of trying to assign like a narrative to the story that's being told on Jesus is King. And we've really latched on to the idea that it's a chiasm, which is like, as opposed to a typical story you'd find in like Western literature, Western film, that has like a beginning, middle, and end, follows the hero's journey, goes A, B, C, blah, blah, blah. Like a chiasm kind of has an A, B, A structure, kind of like it looks like a hill, like it has a mirrored structure where like the first half kind of reflects the second half, and you have this middle point that would be Everything We Need. I really liked what you said last episode, in that if we're looking at First Corinthians and which is a book in the Bible that was referenced very early on in the album. And this idea of ascending into heaven, and that you start in your mortal physical body and then you ascend into a spiritual body when you go to heaven. I really think that is kind of the mirrored structure you're seeing here. Kanye channeling that his spirit that will ultimately decide whether or not, he ascends to heaven. And that's the second half, is like Kanye in that mindset now. Like, he's moved past all of the physical material things on earth that get in his head and make him act the way he acts, and is more focused on himself and his spirit and himself just as a Christian in the world and like affecting the world. And so even though the song like kind of does have that downer energy, like ultimately Kanye is ascending in this part. He may not feel like he fits in with the Christian world, as we'll see in the song of the lyrics, but he also knows what's right. He knows his relationship with God. He knows he's doing the right thing. So in that sense, like, there's a positive energy to the song.
Absolutely. And just, it's a positive way of dealing with that kind of criticism, as opposed to maybe how he would have dealt with it in the past.
In the past, as in the first 5 songs on the album.
Yeah, right. He's just finding a more productive way of going about it.
Yeah, instead of wrestling God.
And I mean, there's stories like this in the Bible as well. I mean, we've seen Kanye reference the story of Paul, the story of Nebuchadnezzar. As we've been reading through, there's countless times where we just see people that were either non-believers or halfway believers, or that were problematic in some aspect of their life, having an encounter with God that then puts them on a path that's without doubt. And the improvements that they feel and the blessings that they receive in the aftermath of that. It doesn't mean that it's without trial, right?
Right.
Because Paul really had a lot of trial, but there's just more certainty in the speaker or in the character after they have this encounter.
Totally. Yeah. Well, let's get to that certainty.
Yeah, well, so starting off, we should reference that the refrain up top comes from Fred Hammond, and Fred Hammond actually did a interview with Rolling Stone a few days after Jesus is King came out, and the title by Elias Light was Fred Hammond knew he would face backlash for working with Kanye West. He just didn't care. And
Love it.
right. Fred Hammond in the middle of the interview says, he hit me over the summer saying, I'm going to the studio. I'd like to write something with you. I said, here's a song that I think you should add. I did send him a beat. He's a beat maker already. We got on the phone and started talking. If nothing else, I knew a lot of the Christian world would not embrace him. I did something for Snoop on his last record, and I got a lot of flack for it. He got a lot of flack too. Religious people are very territorial, so I knew Kanye would have a hard time. The interviewer asked, why is that backlash prevalent in gospel? And Fred said, I come from the golden age of gospel in the 70s and 80s. You're not supposed to mingle with what the church calls people in the world. If they don't sing gospel exclusively, then you are trying to cross over. You're a hypocrite. God don't love you no more. I care about Kanye staying on and having enough hope to make it through the change that he wants. I know he's strong right now, but the thing that will beat you down the most is when the people who you think should embrace you, they reject you. So I said, you got to block that out. The way to block that out is tell them your point, but tell them in a humble way. Don't rear up. That stuff will die down as they see you stay. He said, okay, cool. What are you thinking? So I gave him a couple scriptures. I told him about the scriptures that said when Jesus was talking to the church, he said, if y'all don't praise me, the very rocks will cry out and praise me. We think that's a mountain or a big old thing, a rock or a stone. It could be. Or it could be people whose lives were stony, cold, hard, people who you would never think would give God any look. He said, I'll touch them, make them praise me. So I'm looking at Kanye and saying it's possible that you're one of those rocks, but don't be hard against anybody. They're going to doubt you. Just don't be hard against them. He said, that sounds great. He said he had a vibe and he sent me that. That's the part you hear. Sings, and he sings to the interviewer, hands on, hands up. That's all he had, and some music that went after. So I wrote the verse that I sang. I deserve all the criticism you got.
Yeah. Pretty interesting stuff. Like, just, I mean, just watching Kanye kind of have the back and forth with somebody, like he knows he wants Fred Hammond in the song, but doesn't know exactly what he wants from Fred Hammond yet, you know? And this is what I love about Kanye, like the back and forth he has with people and how collaborative he is. And he really finds, you know, the connection with somebody, and that comes out in what you hear in Hands On. That's amazing.
Yeah, right. They're able to have a discussion that keeps with Kanye's vision, but also broadens it and adds layers to it or context to it that Kanye himself may not have had.
Yeah. And the interesting thing that I think came out of that conversation is Fred Hammond gave him the lyrics, you know, and then Kanye said, like, it's too apologetic, which I think is interesting because, as you know, Kanye says, pray for me eventually in the song, but it's so much more than that. Like, he wants to be part of the Christian community, but at the same time, he wants to hold the Christian community accountable. And that's the strange mix that comes to the song and is really, I think, infused into that phrase, hands on, that Fred Hammond brings. Like, what exactly does hands on mean? I mean, we'll be talking about it, I guess, but I just think that's really cool.
It is. It is. Yeah, that idea of like, okay, I want to apologize and like meet you halfway, but I don't want to be too apologetic.
Yeah.
I got to stand ground, which, yeah, so hands on, the term in the Bible comes up a lot.
Oh my God. So much.
Bible Gateway has it listed 46 times. And that's just like the strict hands-on words, starting in Genesis. Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood.
Yeah.
So
that's the interesting tension with the word is like, don't put your hands on somebody. In that sense, it kind of has a negative, like combative nature, but also hands-on is like you put your hands on somebody to help them, to heal them in a time of need.
yeah, right. There's both like the violent and the healing or helpful aspects to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like, I mean, a lot in Exodus and Leviticus, it's just like laying your hands on rams or bulls. There's like or livestock.
What book is that where there's like six lines in a row where they put their hands on rams, and I was like, what the fuck is happening here?
It's either Exodus or Leviticus.
I was interested in that.
Yeah. But really, once you get to the New Testament, you start getting into a lot of the Jesus aspect of laying your hands on somebody and healing the sick and helping people, raising the dead. So, as my new puppy runs up to me.
Oh, Archer?
Yes, Archer. This would be his podcast debut.
Heyo.
So really what stood out to us and that we think might be more of some of the relevant energy that Kanye's channeling rather than just straight up the broader idea of laying your hands on somebody and helping them is that it's actually in Act 9, which is Saul's conversion, which we get a use of hands-on. And we know that Kanye has gravitated to the story of Saul becoming Paul and Paul being a messenger. It was the whole basis of the life of Pablo. But you have in Acts 9, Saul on the road to Damascus, God showing up and blinding him. And he says that after he blinded Paul, the Lord goes, this guy, Ananias?
Gosh, that's a weird name.
Yeah, right. Ananias? We'll go with Ananias. And he says, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias. Is that how I said it? Come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. So, and Ananias says, I've heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem, and he has come here with authority from the chief priest to arrest all who call on your name. But the Lord said, go, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. Then Ananias went to the house and entered it, placing his hands on Saul. He said, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, has sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength. Relevant here just because the first portion of the song kind of demonstrates a similar transformation that Saul undertook, Kanye undertakes. So in the same way that Saul went from sinner to reborn, Kanye himself details going from sinner to reborn.
Yeah, it's I think yesterday when we were prepping for the song, we both kind of had like different ideas of like what the intent of the song, well, maybe not the intent of the song, but like what specific direction it was going. Because when I read that passage and I think about the term hands-on and how Kanye is asking people to put their hands on him and help him, that kind of makes me think like, well, on the life of Pablo, Kanye was positioned as the Saul figure, but eventually he became a saint. He became Paul, which kind of flips it on its head. Like he's no longer the person persecuting Christians. Christians are now persecuting Kanye for the way he acts as a Christian. So it's kind of a reversal. And in that sense, it makes me think, is Kanye talking about like putting his hands on people, or is there just like a double meaning to the idea of hands on and trying to look at it as a more of a communal term and say like, hey, let's stop fighting each other. Let's stop putting our hands on each other in this negative way. Like let's help each other heal.
You can really take it in those multiple meanings, right? And would it be the first time he's layered aspects of something? Like, I mean, on feedback, we know that feedback can be both something that you receive from somebody in a positive or negative way. Usually, like, let me give you some feedback here. There's usually a little bit more of a negative connotation to it. Constructive, but negative still. But also it's a sound that a microphone makes when it gets too close to the amp, or I don't know. But we all know the sound of that feedback, that screech, and the awkwardness of it. And you could see that title on The Life of Pablo being both the feedback that he's receiving or going to receive from others for his behavior, but also as a moment of feedback that he's at this ramped up state, and how he's sounding, how he's conveying himself isn't how he wants to convey himself. It's more feedback than message at that point.
Right.
One last thing, just in the refrain, it talks about like complicating it even more and just adding to what you're saying. Like it says hands up high, hands on, hands on, hands on, hands up. Like when do you have your hands up?
Yeah.
It typically is when you're being held up, right?
Right.
Like put your hands to the sky, or like when cops show up and are arresting you, like hands up. Like there's something very conflict oriented in that statement that goes with more of the dramatic reading of hands on being like, yo, I'm going to put these hands on you.
Yeah.
Versus like lay your hands on me.
Yeah. And also says in your face in the refrain, which is kind of the similar energy, like somebody in your face, someone you telling you to put your hands up. It's strange. You kind of don't know how to read it immediately.
No, right? But the siren behind you, I think, adds to the drama. Well,
Chicago, there's a lot of sirens.
Yeah. Makes me think of All of the Lights, you know? So we get into the first verse, and oh, look at that. Kanye says, cut out all the lights, he the light. We know that Kanye has had a relationship with lights over the course of his discography, from the idea of flashing lights and it representing the paparazzi, but also kind of you being at this famous level that you have the paparazzi following you, to all of the lights, street lights on 808s and Heartbreak, and the street lights representing kind of each moment of joy that he would get from fame. Isn't that what we said about the street lights?
Yeah.
but that they come and go and just kind of pass you by, and you have these like periods of darkness in between, all the way to all of the lights, where the lights make up the environment that he's in, and they're not really that good. They're arranged from like indulgent to serious. Yeah, and then we even have at the start of this album, Jesus is King, on Follow God, there's multiple times where Kanye mentions lights. First up, he says, looking for a bright light. I mean, at that point, and especially as we talked about, like, Follow God is looking at the struggle of him supposedly being, not supposedly, but wanting to be Christian, but acting in a way that's not Christ-like. So as he opens up the song, he's detailing all these ways in which his life isn't really satisfying. And he's screaming at his dad, and he's screaming at the ref. And that first section ends with him saying that he's looking for a bright light, and that he's using a supernova for a nightlight. Mm-hmm. Almost like he's creating this explosive thing for himself to push away the darkness. But is that really sustainable? And even in the middle part of the song, you have people saying, turn it down, a bright light. Like, Kanye is shining too bright, his light is too bright, and he needs to turn it down. So there's a lot of self-interest mixed in with that at this point on Hands On, when you get cut out all the lights, it can relate to so much context, not just on this album, but in terms of Kanye's discography on a whole. And we know that those lights refer to so much about fame and ego for Kanye.
Yeah, it's an interesting tension created there at the beginning of the album, because it makes you wonder, like, what is the journey of the album? Because Kanye, you know, he's very much Christian again. He made an album called Jesus is King. He doesn't strike me as somebody who's lost as a Christian, and he doesn't seem like somebody who isn't preaching the word of God. But there in that song, you know, he's looking for a bright light, and it doesn't seem that he's found it. But here in Hands On, you know, he says he is the light, you know, talking about God. You don't need all of these lights that represent fame and all of these material things. Like, you have God, he's the light, which I think just signals that is kind of the journey of the album. Like you said last episode, it's the physical body and the spiritual body. He's so focused on the things around him, you know, all of the lights, that he's been clouded. His vision's been clouded, and he doesn't see God's light for what it truly is. And in this song, he has seen it. So right there in the first line, like, that is seemingly a good thing.
Right. Like, I've had this realization. But then we go into a scene, and we get kind of the lines that follow are all part of this scene, where it's got pulled over, see the brights, which is, I think, something most of us can relate to, getting pulled over at night and you see the cop lights in the rearview mirror.
I hate it.
Have you ever been pulled over at night?
Yeah. Obviously nothing for anything major. It's always like dumb shit. Like, I think a cop pulled me over once because he was just looking to pull anyone over at night, and he made up some reason to pull me over. And it actually became a real pain in the ass because I didn't have an updated insurance card on me. So, like, I went through this whole fucking thing, but I guess that's not really that big of a deal.
Frustrating, but not as serious as
a very white story about getting pulled over.
Yeah, the one time I got pulled over in high school, and I had my high school girlfriend in the passenger seat, and I was driving like a little Firebird, and I was going 35 in a 25 because I just passed the stop, like the change in speed limit. Like, I go past the sign still at 35, like, foot not on the gas, and the cop pulls over, or like pulls out a parking lot, pulls me over. And as he walks up to the car, he looks at me, looks at high school girlfriend in the passenger seat, and looks in the back seat, and her little brother's back there. And he's like this little 10-year-old kid, and he's holding a Maxim that I had in the back seat. And the kid looks up over the Maxim and kind of smiles at the cop and says, "Hey." And the cop looks at both of us and shakes his head and frowns. I did not get out of that ticket.
I think he should have let you go. I would have felt bad for you.
Right? Like, look, I'm dealing with this
Yeah,
kid.
and then like
Like,
more of like a pathetic way though.
oh yeah, absolutely. But no, nope. But there's just that kind of like dread in the moment of getting pulled over and you see the brights. But in this case, like we'll see that it's well, this is where we have maybe different opinions on it. I view this as like his encounter with God and his Paul moment or Saul moment where he was going about his life as it was and finally gets corrected. So when you see the got pulled over, see the brights, it's a nice contrast to looking for a bright light and follow God. And it's like God finally took him aside and showed him the bright that he's been looking for. And while that can feel very dreadful at the moment, it's ultimately this good thing.
I love that reading, and the only different energy I was bringing to that line when I first read it was because I thought back to follow God, and that line, "Tell me what your life like," turned it down a bright light. Driving with my dad, and he told me it ain't Christ-like. And I've always, I mean, back when we first did the episode, I thought of that line and thought about getting pulled over. Like that's immediately the image that strikes me when I read that line. And it's coupled with this idea that you're being pulled over at the same time your dad is telling you aren't being Christ-like. So you're being pulled over for not being Christ-like. So when I read this line in Hands On, I don't think of it so much as like God pulling him over. I think of that first line of "He is the light" as something separate. And then we go into a scene and it's Christians pulling Kanye over, as you know, the rest of the song kind of goes into that. Like it's Kanye's place in the Christian world. But ever since you brought that up, I kind of like the idea that it's a mesh of those two things. That it is, the song is largely obviously dealing with Kanye's relationship with the Christian world, but it's so much more than that. And that's what I love about Kanye is like there's always layers to everything he does. And I think it's also getting at the idea that, you know, Kanye kind of has to, he's been baptized and everything, and he started his life anew, and he is kind of a born again Christian in quotes, but he still has to pay for his past. Like he hasn't passed his demons yet. Like he's always got to answer to whatever wrongs he's doing from God. So again, I think it gets at that sense of community. Like all Christians could do better, and Kanye's looking to better himself and better the Christian community, while at the same time the Christian community is coming at him. It's a weird mesh of all of that.
Yeah, layers. Yeah, talking about that driving with my dad and he told me ain't Christ-like, that's such good payoff as well, because again, you may wonder why he's just going to the scene of getting pulled over, but he sets it up with the earlier line of driving with my dad. And to have that little resonance, it's just the little things that add a bit of continuity to the song that give it, or to the album, that give it more depth and just more subtext than what you'd initially expect, or when you just look at the songs as independent of each other.
Yeah, and it also makes you think about setting, like, because again, if the first half is physical body, the second half is your spiritual body. That song, "Follow God," that moment with his dad, like it's a very personal, intimate, like physical moment. He's describing an actual scene of his dad. To whereas this scene kind of seems very metaphorical. Like got pulled over, see the brights. Like who's pulling you over? Like God's pulling you over. Like that didn't actually happen. Like Christians didn't actually pull you over. It's you responding to like this energy you're getting from God, from people.
And you do get that next line, "What you doing on the street at night?" Which, when you're looking at it in that more symbolic way, what's Kanye doing out in this nightlife? Like, what's he doing? Like, the behavior that we knew that he had from Graduation, 808s, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, Yeezus, onto the first half of Life of Pablo. Like, it's kind of recapping that period of time. And I wonder if they're gonna read your rights, which just kind of plays more into the idea of like being pulled over and the stress that you're feeling in that moment. So it's like you can feel the conversation happening or the scene continuing of a typical pullover. And then 13th Amendment, 3 strikes. We know that Kanye's been a pretty big proponent of the idea that the 13th Amendment has created a prison slave industry. And this is what happens for a lot of people. They're brought in on ridiculous charges and sent to jail over it just because of the 3-strike rule. It doesn't matter what you do for that 3rd strike. You're sent to jail for this minimum sentence that enslaves you.
Yeah. And the next line kind of gets at that we've kind of moved beyond metaphor in a sense, and we're getting at something very political and specific when he says made a left when I should have made a right, which I think on the surface on first reading makes you think of left and right politically, liberal, conservative. Kanye was clearly a liberal or embraced liberal policies for much of his career, and recently has embraced Trump. And people look at him as now being right. So I think it has that reading, but at the same time, again, the power of Kanye, there's duality to the line, and that the line references Ecclesiastes. Did I say that right this time?
Ecclesiastes, yeah.
Okay. Chapter 10, line 2, the heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool inclines to the left. So getting at this idea that it goes beyond picking a side politically and more just where your heart lies in the matter, which I think is cool.
Yeah, and just the idea, we know that Kanye's talked, and he'll even say it in the song, that he had been working for the devil. And now he's working for God and how great that is. So this idea that for so long he had been a fool in who he was working for. And he should have been making a right. And you can actually trace that back. I mean, you look at his discography, College Dropout isn't very indulgent. I mean, it is at times, but not when it comes to a lot of celebrity excess in the way that we see on later albums, because Kanye wasn't at that point in his life. And you had Jesus Walks, you had Never Let Me Down. Late Registration, it starts to enter a bit more into the picture. You don't have as much godliness. And by the time we get to Graduation, it's game over. I mean, that whole album's about Kanye becoming corrupted when he's become famous and graduated into that level of celebrity. So he literally made this turn towards foolishness and realized that he should have made it right.
Yeah. It's, I think, again, it speaks to, it works in both cases. If either God's pulling him over or just the general public's pulling him over for his behavior. Because if God's pulling him over, he's in a way saying 3 strikes. Yeah, I have 3 strikes against me. I haven't lived a very Christian life by living this celebrity life. I'm out at night. I'm not doing the right thing. But at the same time, if he's calling to the hypocriticism of can I say that, hypocriticism?
Sure.
Okay. Of the public looking at him and saying that he's not Christ-like or whatever judgments they're making about him, it speaks to the left and right, speaks to just politically how he's thought he was one with one side of the aisle, and now he's found solace by embracing Trump and being on the right side of the aisle. Yeah,
which I have so many thoughts on that I won't say.
That's for another podcast.
Okay. And the response in this moment, as Kanye is aware of the 3 strikes, he says, told God last time on life. And this is one of those ways you could read it both ways again. It's God that he's speaking to in the moment, who asked you, what are you doing on the street at night? Or this is just his response to the public or to the Christian community, that he has already told God that this was the last time. And on life, and we've seen this on motif throughout, especially on God. It was used a lot. And here is just I told God, this is the last time I'm doing this. And that's on my life. I swear that this is the last time. And he follows that line up with, told the devil that I'm going on a strike. So you do kind of see the progression from that moment, which is what makes me think that it's kind of God that pulls him over. And in this moment, he tells God, this was the last time you're going to find me out on the street at night. And in the wake of that encounter, he tells the devil, you know what? I'm going on strike. And devil, when I see you, it's on sight that we're going to fight.
I love those lines because you could tell he's really moved beyond like Kitsy Ghost, where demons constantly haunted him and he felt like he was battling demons. And that whole album is very much him working through battling his demons. Like it's very much about the progress of himself and getting better. And here he's told the devil he's on strike and he's going to tell him on sight. Like you could tell there's like a confidence to it and a finality to it. That's like the devil is in my past now.
Yeah. Like such a great energy. That's why I find this album so cathartic on the whole, just to go from that place of indecision to a place of confidence is really satisfying, whether I'm religious or not, just in the character journey.
Yeah.
Told the devil when I see him on sight, I've been working for you my whole life. Yeah. So that's Kanye admitting that he had been playing for the wrong team.
Including just a few months ago when he made I Love It.
See, how could Kanye be conservative when he's going on a strike? That's clearly somebody in favor of the progressive labor movement and
he's part of a
unionization. Yeah. I've been working for my whole life. And then we transfer out of that. The music even changes at this point and Kanye's tone changes. So I think we're in agreement that opening vignette ends at that point, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And then we get nothing worse than a hypocrite. So I guess, you talked about how cut out all the lights, he the light. If that's this opening line that then brings us into the vignette, but isn't part of the vignette, you could see the same thing about nothing worse than a hypocrite. Like it's another line that just is kind of like the chapter title.
Yeah.
And then what follows is the vignette that's part of the moment.
Yeah, especially because much like the he the light line, like there's not just one way to read it. Like immediately you think there's one way to read it, but as it goes on and that you're trying to figure out like the tense and the point of view, I don't know. It's strange reading these lines. This is what we do in the show. Like we can usually make sense of any Kanye's verse, but it's and I don't want to call it messy, but I find it really hard to track exactly what he means here. And again, I think that's because there's layers to it, but I don't know. I hope we don't sound stupid trying to describe these lines.
Yeah, bear with us, because nothing worse than a hypocrite. You can either read it as part of this scene that's going to follow, where he is detailing what he's been hearing from the Christians, or it's him commenting that Christians are being hypocrites, and what follows are some of those hypocritical things.
Yeah.
So change, he ain't really different. He's referring to himself in the third person now. As in, he didn't really change. And this was something that so many people were saying at the start or throughout 2019, but especially following Coachella, that Kanye was just using religion as a means to make himself likable again, because he knew that people in the Black community would always forgive if religion was involved. And so he was just being manipulative. He wasn't serious. This wasn't actually like who he had become.
Yeah. I mean, I'm open to having like an open dialogue about Kanye, and I definitely think he's done things that can be, he should be held accountable for. But this is one where I really hate when people say things like that. Like he's been a Christian his entire discography. He just maybe hasn't, even in his eyes, like he'll admit, like the best kind of Christian. This isn't any sort of like, it's not like he's taking advantage of Christians here, or like trying to like get in people's good graces again. To me, it's just like a different phase of his Christian mentality.
Right. He's still the guy that made Jesus Walks and Never Let Me Down. Like, it's not like he never had anything to do with religion and now is suddenly pivoting hard to win people back. Like, that's absurd. He's somebody that suffered one of the hardest years of his life and found comfort in religion, which
Yeah.
I'm almost positive is what happens to like 99% of people that are really religious. But the next line, he ain't even tried to get permission, which, yeah, Kanye didn't try to get permission from religious leaders. I saw that as a criticism too. Like, he hasn't gone through the proper channels to do what he's doing.
I think it's the idea of like getting permission. Like Kanye is just so open about his past demons and how he wasn't living his life properly, I guess, in the Christian view, and how he succumbed to the limelight. Like he's very open about that and his demons and how he used to work for the devil. The fact that he is so open about that and ready to change that, like, it isn't really a permission thing, is it? Like, if you know you've lived your life sinfully and want to stop living it sinfully, like, you get baptized and you become anew. Like, it doesn't. And I think it gets at something larger that's going on in the song, is that does Kanye even need to be part of the Christian community? And here I think he's kind of sarcastically commenting on that. Like, he ain't even tried to get permission. Like, you don't need permission to be a follower of God.
Yeah, and it was something with Sunday service too. Like, people were saying, like, well, if it's a church, like, where's the pastor? Where's like the preaching? Like, it's no church. It's just a money grab. Like, I think that's where some of that permission idea comes in from as well. And it's just like, it doesn't have to be only this thing.
It's silly. It's so stupid.
And then you get the most confusing line on the album. At least for us, trying to wrap our head around it. Ask for advice and they dissed him. Because it sounds like he's saying, like, I asked for advice and they dissed him, or like asked for advice and they dissed him. It's just weird. He's trying to get the syllable count right, but it throws off my logical brain in trying to read it.
Yeah. The only way I made it made sense was he says, nothing worse than a hypocrite. And he goes on to imitate Christians who say change ain't really different. He even tried to get permission. And they're calling him a hypocrite. But Kanye could be calling those Christians who are saying that to him hypocrites. So we get those two lines that are imitating Christians. And then he comes back to himself and says, ask for advice. And they dissed him, saying like, well, I tried to ask for advice and they dissed me, which is hypocritical because you're a Christian and you should be trying to help me. The only thing that throws that off is that he says he when he's like imitating the Christians, talking about himself in the third person, and then says him in the third person. So he's still talking about himself in the third person. It's weird.
Yeah, it's just the tenses start to get, because we get that there's at least for two lines and possibly that third one, like he's still imitating these people, but just the flow of it, of that last line, trips you up. But the thing is that they're still he's asking for advice and he's getting dissed, which sucks and shows out some of that hypocrisy that we start with. And then Kanye comes back in talking to the first person, said, I'm finna do a gospel album. What have you been hearing from the Christians? And we already know what he's been hearing from the Christians because he just told us. So it's kind of like you get the example first and then jump back to the broader context. And then he says, they'll be the first ones to judge me, make it feel like nobody loved me. They'll be the first ones to judge me, feeling like nobody loved me, which just really reinforces the idea of the hypocrisy.
Yeah. And to go from make it feel like nobody loved me to feeling like nobody loved me, like it went from like, ooh, it can feel like nobody loves me to like he feels it. And I can only imagine what that must be like for Kanye, who's trying to find his way back, who's trying to escape his demons and live a new kind of life, become a Christian. Again, to have the very people of that community being the first ones to judge you, like that's heavy, man. Like it's not just the general public that's judging you and, you know, kind of skeptical of you. It's the people you're looking to embrace and be part of that are judging you and making it feel like nobody loves you. That's so intense.
Yeah, they're supposed to be your your comfort, like your shelter. And nah. This actually came up recently in the GQ interview that came out yesterday, which is a great interview. It's really long, but it's reminiscent if you read the Wall Street Journal article by Christina Binkley, who Travis then did a wonderful interview with, Story that you can go back and listen to. But Will Welsh asked Kanye, "You specifically highlighted that Sunday service is a place without judgment, but what happens when you take it on tour and you're headlining Christian festivals?" And Kanye says, "I feel that we all have sin, and when certain sins are worn more on our sleeves, it's easier for Christians who are not Christ, but are human beings, to be able to channel judgment at what they see in front of them. The other thing is, if anyone claims to be Christian, they're accepting accountability to other Christians. But people don't realize that Christians are loud, that we have a right to righteous anger, that Jesus flipped tables. They think that all of a sudden you believe in Christ, so we're not even supposed to speak up. And if we speak up, people will say, oh, you're being judgmental. And it's like, oh, now because I'm Christian, I don't even have an opinion anymore. I'm Christian and I still have an opinion, but my opinion is based on the word." And Will politely and kind of surprisingly to me, which I think probably speaks to the years of relationship that they've had, because Will's the editor-in-chief of GQ. He's interviewed Kanye a lot. He says, "Let me phrase the question differently. The Kanye West that I have known over the years hates institutions and hates systems of control and will do anything to break out from being controlled. I'm wondering if that yay will persist as you encounter more churches and religious institutions, which I at least conceptualize as systems of control." Which, like, what a question, right?
Yeah, shit.
I see opportunity for creativity inside our faith, but let me, because I know you're looking for a real answer to how does the guy who made Yeezus, which is a very punk album, make a Jesus is King? And Will comes back with, well, not how did you make Jesus is King, but how do you headline a Christian festival or interact with various churches? You having your own personal relationship with Jesus is clean and clear, but what happens when these other organizations come into play that are institutions of control? And Kanye says, "I think, yes, there are groups, as man does, that take the word and use it to control other people. But as you said, I'm expressing my personal relationship with Christ. When I was not owning up to the maximum of who I could be as a dad and the maximum of who I could be as a husband, that kind of behavior, that kind of mentality landed me in a place where I needed to be medicated. Now all of that energy and that creativity that I have channeled and put on track comes from me surrendering to God and saying that everything is in God's will. People can say in the same way, hey, why do you go to Paris if they didn't want you in the fashion houses? And that's not going to stop my love for clothing, my love of creativity, my love of going to see the shows. And people could say, what about these things that men have done with the word of Christ that were bad and, let's say, over-institutionalized? And I'm saying that's not going to stop my love of Christ. I'm going to keep on expressing what God has done for my life." Which, interesting in this context of, as you said, like, does he need to be part of this community? And what does that look like? What does that mean? I mean, clearly he's addressing the community itself, but where does he stand in that?
Yeah, it's I think that whole response to that guy's question, that to me signals like really the weight and energy of this song is that it's just for a while I thought it was like such a sad song, and it is. Like, Kanye does want to be part of this Christian community, and they make him feel like nobody loves him. Like, fuck, like that is so heavy, and how do you deal with that? But that response, and after we discussed the song, and kind of what I realized is like the song is just, when it comes down to it, very real. Like, it just represents his situation so perfectly. And then that, yes, he is sad that he can't be part of this community, but he's also Kanye West. He's the punk guy who made Yeezus. He's not somebody that's ever going to let something like that get him down, because he has his relationship with God that he has. You know, he's Kanye West. He's always going to act the way he wants to act because he knows himself. And, you know, that's why he embraces Trump. Like, that's been his whole message this whole time, is you can't tell me what to do. And that includes when he says that, he includes the Christian community. Like, the Christians, as shitty as they can make him feel, are never going to make him not be a Christian, not be a follower of God, and not eventually ascend to heaven. And I think that's ultimately the energy I get from this song now, is that, yeah, it sucks, but Christians don't deter him from being who he is.
Right. And he's going to keep being the best one that he can be in the way that he thinks is best, rather than conforming to what everybody else thinks that he needs to be or how he should be, whether that's in religion, politics, music, fashion, etc.
Absolutely.
Home design.
Domes.
Told people God was my mission. What have you been hearing from the Christians? They'll be the first ones to judge me, make it feel like nobody loved me, make you feel all alone. I love this too, because you get that little bit of repetition and refrain coming between that first time through. What have you been hearing from the Christians and judgment? And instead of getting that make it feel like nobody loved me, feeling like nobody loved me, you get make it feel like nobody loved me, and then it blows up into this much larger, more detailed experience of make you feel alone in the dark, and you'll never see the light, man. You never see in home, and you never see the domes. I can feel it when I write, point of living in the right. If they only see the wrongs, never listen to the songs, just to listen as a fight, but you booked me for the fight. It's so hard to get along if they only see the slight from the love of religion. Like, that's everything that's now pouring out of him. And there's just a wave of emotion that comes out that's very cathartic and illuminating, and as you said, that mix of sadness but also confidence.
You're totally right. The flow changes. And Chris, you took plenty of breaths when you were doing that. I don't think Kanye takes a breath during that stretch, and which gives it a lot of power. Like, I think you're right. It feels like he's pouring all of these emotions off his chest, like all at once. Like, it makes it feel like nobody loves me. Like you said, like you think he's going to say it again, but then he goes into this like kind of rant. And again, it's so sad. Like, he's just piling on how rejected he feels from this community. It's very powerful.
Yeah. And it's like, if he feels that he's in the dark and alone and like he'll never see the light, then that means that you're never seeing home. And that means that you're never seeing the domes. Like, that can be, the you here can be like actually to somebody else, but it could also be second person self-reflective. Like, they make you feel alone. Yeah, it's definitely second person self-reflective, right? So he's feeling like the you in this case is me, like Kanye. So he's feeling alone, like he'll never see the light. And because of that, he's not seeing the vision of home. He's not seeing the vision of the domes. And there's that loss that happens when you feel that alone. And he says, I can feel it when I write. And it says point of living in the right. But I think what's missing there is what's the point? Because the next line is if they only see the wrongs. So I can feel it when I write. What's the point of living in the right? What's the point of living this good life, living wisely, if the Christians and everybody else only see what I do wrong or what they perceive to be wrong, and they never actually listen to the songs? Just to get them to listen is a fight, and how disappointing that is. I imagine when he says, but you booked me for the fight, that's Kanye saying that God booked him for the fight. Like, this is what he's supposed to do.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. I actually honestly was always kind of confused by that line, but that kind of makes sense.
Just to listen is a fight, but you booked me for the fight. Like, so I'll fight. Like, I'll do this thing.
Yeah. It could also just speak largely to the Christian community. Like, you're part of this godly fight, spiritual warfare. Like, you fight for good, and Christians want me to, but they also just want to fight about everything that I'm doing as a Christian.
Which, how annoying.
That would be annoying.
It's so hard to get along if they only see the slight from the love of religion. If his love of religion only causes them to see a slight, like, how can you possibly get along at that point? And so he kind of details this whole almost like all of the lights mini journey of what this life or what this world looks like. In this case of if he were to be made to feel alone and in the dark. So that's like the next section. And we come back then to what have you been hearing from the Christians, which that line continues to act as kind of a marker for the various little vignettes, these 3 vignettes that have happened since the first one.
Yeah, I love that because like it is all those lines, that rant he goes on is sandwiched between this question, what have you been hearing from the Christians? To have that question and then to go into to be so vulnerable, to express all these things and to there's such hope in that, like hope that he can change his relationship with Christians, but it comes right back to they'll be the first one to judge me, make it feel like nobody loved me. It's almost like they're not hearing any of that.
Yeah, and this is his kind of plea to make it happen, right? Like, ironically, or maybe not ironically at all, but it's a fight to get them to listen to the music, but maybe this is a song that they actually listen to and hear and understand and maybe give him a bit more space. And that's what gets into, not this part, I'm a little ahead of myself, but it's we get to a spot where it seems like if they are listening, he makes the request that he needs, like, lay your hands on me, pray for me. But in this case, we get the repetition of they'll be the first ones to judge me, make it seem like nobody loved me. I'm not trying to lead you to visas. And how he says it is weird, but we're thinking like Visa cards, right?
Yeah, I don't think he's talking about like a visa that you used to go to another country or anything.
And that could throw people off, but the next line is if I tried to lead you to Jesus, we get called halfway believers. And I think that gets at Coachella and a lot of the aftermath of the Sunday service at Coachella. Instead of talking about how Kanye had 50,000 people out listening to worship music, it was talking about how Kanye was selling $100 church clothes and trying to profit from church clothes, which started this whole...
So stupid.
Yeah, right? This whole media subplot of Sunday service only being another means of making money and only being a way to sell merch at a higher price and to profit off of religion, which, God, the amount of people that were saying like, oh, how like a non-Christian is it to try to make money off of being a Christian? You're just like, you have mega pastors that have 4 private jets. Like, what the...
I'm not even going to touch that one.
I could go off for 3 hours about it. But yeah, I think this is Kanye just kind of responding to that. Like, I'm not trying to like get you to use your like credit card to buy things. Like, I'm trying to lead you to Jesus, but I only get called like a halfway believer. Like, I'm fake. And they say only halfway read Ephesians, which I have witnessed on my Facebook timeline. A kid I went to college with who became really religious get into an argument about the Bible with people, and a bunch of people are commenting on his stance. He was against giving grant money or college aid to illegal immigrants or the kids of illegal immigrants in California. And he's really religious, so
cool
a bunch
guy.
of people were just yeah, right. So he's conservative but really religious. And a lot of people are just like, how does that make sense? Like, when you're so biblical, there's all these things in the Bible, like this, this, and this. And he's saying that, you have to respect the laws because the laws of man are the laws of God. And other people are throwing Bible quotes back at him. And he legitimately said he went to church more days each week than this other guy. So the other guy shouldn't be quoting the Bible to him.
God, can you pull up this argument? I would love to read it.
I wish it was from like 2013.
Find it.
All right, since you asked. But geez, so I always think about that, but like the idea of like criticizing him for only halfway reading Ephesians sounds like something that I've heard people say.
Yeah, so like that line references Ephesians is basically like it's a 6-chapter book, and the first 3 chapters are about like how to fulfill God's purpose, you know, like how to live properly as a Christian. And then the last 3 chapters are about living as a Christian. One of the chapters is even called Practical Ways to Fulfill God's Purpose in the Church, which is lovely. It tells you right there in the title what you're going to get. But I love, again, that I think there's duality to Kanye's line in that he is, again, imitating people who are saying like he only halfway read Ephesians. But at the same time, he's kind of saying to them, like, you're being hypocritical in the way you're attacking me because I'm trying to lead people to Jesus. Like, I am being a good Christian, and the fact that I'm selling merchandise has nothing to do with that. And the fact that you're even attacking me for that in the first place means you're not acting very good as a Christian. So you only halfway read Ephesians, motherfucker.
Right. I only halfway read Ephesians. You're only halfway read Ephesians. Otherwise,
tell me the title of chapter 5. Tell me.
What is it?
That's right.
Now I can
know.
Now I can say to people like, oh, okay, you're so religious. What book is Armor of God in?
They'll probably know that.
Yeah, probably. So one of the things, Ephesians 6, maybe we can save it. We'll save it.
Yeah.
So we get only halfway read Ephesians, and then he says, only if they knew what I knew, I was never knew till I knew of a true living God, Yeshua. So Yeshua is just another name for God. But I guess that's saying what? Like, if they only knew what Kanye felt on the inside and how he had never felt reborn or renewed until like he had encountered God, and that he really does feel renewed by this experience. And if they could understand that, they would not criticize him.
Yeah, it gets at what he talks about. Everybody's relationship with God is different, and it's him getting past the groupthink. Like, there's one way you can live as a Christian. Like, no, we all connect with God in different ways, and we all have weird, strange paths that bring us to God and bring us to this moment where we feel we need to be saved. And you couldn't possibly understand that. Like, you can't see what I'm seeing when I talk to God.
And there might be something there if we want to relate it to Kanye's life of the idea of it seemed like coming out of 2016 and his hospitalization that in 2018 he was really trying to be renewed. A lot of his tweets at that time were very philosophical about water and love and rebirth and breaking out of the simulation. Ye as an album talked about becoming a child again on Ghost Town and the power of that. And Kanye had talked about multiple times we need to be like children. And I mean, even as far back as Power, he was saying my childlike creativity, and talking about the empowerment that he got from that was being locked away or blocked by the responsibilities he was feeling from society and as an adult, heading into Kids See Ghost and kind of the renewal he was hoping for there, but still didn't get. Like, that album doesn't necessarily end with catharsis. It ends in a place of just finding a way to hopefully manage how you're feeling through God and deal better with these emotions that you know will come and go and will pass. So it seemed like Kanye had been looking for this renewal, and then him saying, I was never new till I knew of a true living God, Yeshua. Like, it was really at the end of that journey in 2018 that he came back to religion. And that was the thing that really helped him and saved him in a way that nothing else prior to that had.
Yeah, I love it. By the way, I don't want to skip over this. This might be my favorite line on the entire album, because he gets the rhyme with new of by saying new, which I love. I love every time that line comes on. I get a little bit of excitement inside my body. And I'm like, oh, I get to say new. And sometimes I even say it just like walking around the house sometimes.
What's a movie where he goes, hoo-ah?
Oh, every Al Pacino movie ever? I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking of Al Pacino. Like, what I knew, like Kanye, do an Al Pacino.
That's great. That's what Kanye should have done.
Maybe it'll be Al Pacino for Halloween. So then we come back to Fred Hammond, and the Fred Hammond show begins at this point. So we get the repetition of hands on, hands up, in your face, the reason, and that conflict inherent to that makes a lot more sense at this point, given that we know that the song's inherently about the conflict with Christians. And then verse 2 starts with Fred Hammond saying, I deserve all the criticism you got. If that's all the love you have, that's all you got, which to me is like such a great insult.
Ooh, yeah.
And is like a very like church insult. Like, oh yes, criticize me. If that's all the spirit and love and like Christianity you have in your soul, fine. Then that's all that you have. And they're like, like,
I love this. One man show.
If that's all the love you have, then that's all that you got. It's very political is not the right word, but it's very patient. And I think that's kind of emblematic of the patience that Kanye is expressing kind of, or has at this point for the criticism he's receiving, rather than trying to fight back against it.
Yeah. Also a little bit of that, like, he uses anger at the same time, because that I deserve all the criticism you got. That was the line Fred Hammond gave Kanye, and Kanye said it's too apologetic. So yes, Kanye deserves the criticism. You know, God pulls him over. He the like getting back at that. But at the same time, these people, like, they shouldn't go without judgment either. And if that's all the love they're going to give me, that's all you've got. Like, he's kind of just calling them out at the same time.
Yeah, like that can't be all the love that you have. And if you're a Christian, like it's supposed to be about the love, right?
Right.
To sing of change, you think I'm joking. To praise his name, you ask what I'm
Joker
smoking.
reference.
Oh my God, it's right there. It's been right there the whole
Does the Joker
time.
ever smoke?
But I've never legitimately put that together, like thought that you think I'm joking when we talked about it potentially having the sample from the Joker movie. And like joking's come up a few times, but not like over Kanye's discography, but it's not like a word he uses all the time.
I don't think he's ever joked once in a song, so I think this cements our theory.
I think it's a point. It's a point in our favor. To praise his name, you ask what I'm smoking, which just gets back to, you know, what have you been hearing from the Christians? Yes, I understand your reluctancy, but I have a request. And this is, again, just like with the, if that's all the love you have, like a little bit of a barb. Like, you know, if you're reluctant, sure, but don't throw me up, lay your hands on me. Because that's what you're supposed to do as a Christian, right? You're supposed to love, you're supposed to forgive, you're supposed to pray for someone. And he says, please pray for me. And that actually gets back to Ephesians, where you have the armor of God. And it says, finally be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God, which we talked about in Sela. So that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And it goes on a bit by bit and says, and pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. Get the word request coming up right there, right? With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Oh, this is Ephesians. Ephesians 6, the last half of Ephesians. Pray also for me, that whenever I speak, words may be given me, so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains. Pray that I may declare it fearlessly as I should. So, yeah, like, I'm trying to be a Christian, and you're tearing me down. So here's my request, just like it says in Ephesians, pray for me, so that I can, like, speak fearlessly and do what I'm trying to do. Like the same thing that you should be trying to do, rather than trying to like fucking fuck on me.
That's what he should have said in the song.
Don't fucking fuck on me.
Don't fucking fuck on me.
Oh, wow. You really made it work. But I think that kind of cements, I mean, with the Ephesians reference earlier, the request, and then pray for me, and it's saying pray also for me. I think you're channeling a lot of that energy here, and it once again points out some of the hypocrisy of these Christians, and Kanye kind of high roading them.
Yeah. It's cool because at the beginning of the album, we talked about Ephesians and Selah, whatever the fuck you want to call it, when he says, God is the king, we the soldiers, and this kind of soldier imagery and wearing the armor of God and going out and fighting the good fight. Like in the beginning, it gets at the idea of a spiritual warfare in a very combative way, which represents the first half of the album. Kanye in his physical body going out and like feeling the need to battle. But here at the end, it really gets at the idea of Ephesians and fighting the good fight as more of just like, you fight the fight by preaching the word of God, by going out and like helping people and getting people through like their tough times. And you do it by, just being a Christian and being loving. And it's such an opposite energy here that Kanye is suddenly placing the combativeness on the people who attack him. And he's exposing their hypocrisy by doing that. And that's so beautiful here that he's so open and vulnerable about that he feels so attacked. And all he can say is like, I have a request, like lay your hands on me, like help me be a good Christian. And it's on them at that point.
Right? Like, do your thing. You think I'm a bad Christian? Well, be a better one and help me.
It turns into like a junior high, or a grade school playground argument. You think you're...
You're a better Christian? Buy my lunch. Get me an extra milk.
Chocolate.
Yo, I miss getting to drink chocolate milk at lunch every day.
Did you guys have the bag milks at your school?
Only for like a year in grade school.
Yeah, I think we only had it like for a year too. Something weird must have been going on in the Midwest that year.
I think it was a big push because it was supposed to be more economical and all this stuff. I still remember one day at lunch, Mike McVaney, who I was sitting next to, some girl like had got her milk bag and had it there, and she like was trying to put the straw in, and she did, and she still had her hand on it. And Mike just kind of like looks left and right and swings his arm full windmill and comes down on the bag and like smacks her hand onto the bag. And you just see this geyser of milk shoot into the air.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, all these like fifth graders scream. It was great.
Kids are terrible and it's great.
Yeah. So then you get Hold Myself on Death, which is Kanye coming back in the middle of that. So please pray for me, and then Hold Myself on Death. And we were talking yesterday, and that seemed to be like far more serious. But honestly, I do wonder how like negative it is. Like, could Kanye just be saying at this point, like, I will hold myself, and that's like on death as opposed to like on life? Like, I have no problem like being myself and holding on to myself and hold it down, all fallen down. So even if like everything's falling down, I'll be able to hold it down. Like, but still somebody pray for me. But if you're asking people to like pray for you, and you already talk about like feeling isolated and alone earlier in the song, it just kind of seems like it was bringing back that energy of, if you force me to be outside the light and feel like nobody cares, then I'm just going to be holding myself, and that's going to feel more on death than on life. And when I try to hold it down, everything's going to be falling down. So like, it's going to leave him saying, somebody like pray for me, please, because this can't be my future. This can't be my faith. And you have that power if you just pray for me.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I say this a lot. I feel like it's like kind of everything you said. Like there's a strange mix of energies there. And in some sense, I do think it's Kanye saying, it just makes me think of Kanye's whole quote in the GQ article, how he worships God and the way he worships God. And so in one sense, like, I'll hold myself on death. Like, I'm going to hold myself no matter what. Like, I'm not going to give up again. I'm not going to succumb to the demons again. Like, I'm going to preach the word of God and ascend into heaven and be with God eventually. Like, I'll hold myself. Even when it's all fallen down, like, I'll do it. But at the same time, like, he's asking these people to lay their hands on him and to help him so he doesn't have to hold himself. it's a sad song in that sense that like he wishes like the world could be different and that people would accept him. But at the same time, like he's not going to let that get him down. Like everything might fall down, but he's going to do it.
Right. Right. Like both are pretty powerful because one's just like that power of the self, but the other is getting at like, I need other people. Like I need you. And like, you have the power to help me. Like even me, a celebrity, like who is supposed to be thought of and looked at as this powerful entity. Like I'm still a human. I'm still a person that is affected by you and the things that you do and say. So like, can you please just pray for me?
I'll hold you, bro.
Thank you. Thank you.
I meant Kanye, but yeah, if you ever need it, I'll hold you.
Oh, yeah, I meant Kanye too.
You were saying thank you pretending to be Kanye.
Yeah, that's right. I will say if we were going the Joker route, that would have been a perfect like payoff because the Joker does like fall down and fall apart. And like that's why you need to pray for Kanye so he doesn't become the Joker. But and then we get the final refrain like hands up high, hands on, hands on. And this is where we get the change in context. So like the first hands on is kind of like neutral, right? We aren't really sure how to take it. The first Fred Hammond, like hands up, hands on. After the first verse, when it comes back in, it feels much more antagonistic. And then in that last part, after like somebody pray for me and please pray for me, you really get the meaning of like hands on coming through and like the power of being able to lay your hands on somebody and heal them.
Yeah. Oof. This is an epic song from Kanye West. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, is this our longest episode on Jesus is King?
Yeah, I think it might be.
I don't know. I love this song. I think it's my third favorite on the album. It used to compete for one, but it's still like 1 and 2, or no, 2 and 3.
It might be my number one.
Really?
Yeah, I love it. I don't love the energy of it in the sense that like I like Kanye being sad, but like again, I've never heard Kanye go to this place sonically, and just man, the emotion in his voice and repeating over and over to make it feel like nobody loved me. Like the song is just so much heavier than anything I think Kanye's ever done. I love it. And Kanye makes a lot of good points about these hypocritical Christians, which I like.
I like that too, because it was nice seeing him stand up for himself in that way, because all the criticisms in 2019 about it were so absurd and like constant and unending that for him to actually address it, I did not expect.
Yeah, love it. I mean, that's Kanye West, though. He's going to do that to the end.
Yeah, well, thanks for listening to Hands On. Next time, we'll talk about Use This Gospel.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you about the time I tried to play saxophone in band.
And maybe you'll try to recreate Kenny G's saxo solo again. Saxo solo.
You just, like in the middle of saying saxophone, decide to shorten it?
I was like, yeah, you know what? This episode's a little too long. Like, I don't need to say the whole word.
No. Saxo solo. Welfo for Chriso and Travo. Solongo.
Yeah, stay wavo.
And Lupo.
And holo.